Hello and welcome back to Studio 77. On this video I'm going to show you how I interface my pattern pieces for bag making, specifically for the shark backpack. I hope you find this useful for other bag making patterns too though. When making a bag, it's important to note the designer's instructions and to follow what they say for interfacing suggestions and requirements. You may also have stabilizers too. For the shark backpack, I recommend a fusible fleece as the main structure interfacing and to use woven interfacing for the main pieces and non-woven when interfacing for the lining. If you are unsure or lost what that means, please check out the link in the description as I will be doing a video on the difference to these soon and will post there when it's up. There are different ways to cut your pattern pieces. I like to draw out the rough shapes using a pen on the interfacing so I can then fuse it and cut together as if the fabric is one. Drawing out the shapes first means I don't fuse too much interfacing. You also want to make sure you're laying out your pieces to go in the right direction of the grain. So for this project I want to make sure the top of the pieces are all aligned and perpendicular to the edge or selvage of the fabric. Once I've roughly drawn around the shapes, I cut out the whole piece and I lay that glue side down onto the back of the fabric and fuse it together. You will need to check your specific interfacing guidelines. I'm using Velisaline F220 for the non-woven and a non-branded woven interfacing, but G700 is a great woven interfacing too. The fusible fleece I will be using is the H640. These are all from Velisaline. All of these are fusible on one side only. Now F220 and G700 say to use a damp cloth over the top of the interfacing and to press each area for 12 seconds. I like to also use a Teflon sheet to protect my iron, and you should be careful not to move the iron too much when pressing. I don't however use a damp cloth. You need to test what works for you. I spray the fabric with water first before pressing. You can also press from the front of the fabric, cotton only of course, but sometimes you get little bubbles or folds which you may miss as you can't see the interfacing. Once pressed, you should leave it for 20 minutes before cutting to allow the adhesive to set properly. Okay, so now that I've fused all the fabric, I lay out the pattern pieces ready for cutting, using the pen lines I drew earlier to remember how I originally planned it out. This is why I don't use a friction pen always, but it's all on the inside anyway, so you could use chalk if you're worried about it showing. I like to cut it out with a rotary cutter, but you could draw around the shapes before using scissors if you want to too. I do recommend using a rotary cutter though, as it's much faster. Okay, so here's a pattern piece that requires cutting on the fold. My favourite and most accurate way to do this is actually not to fold the fabric. I lay the piece down and draw around one side and draw the fold line onto the fabric too. Then I flip the pattern piece and draw around the top so it's mirrored, lining up the bottom of the pattern piece to the drawn fold line. It's good to use a friction pen for this and to rub out or iron the middle line before cutting in case you accidentally cut this line too. When it comes to interfacing faux leather, you will do the same process, but you must test how much heat the fabric can take because they're all different. You definitely only want to press from the back of the fabric and use a Teflon sheet or baking sheet between your iron and your interfacing of faux leather. I like to clip the pattern piece to the cut pieces as I go, or if there's labels included, I use those as well. If there are any zipper placement holes, I cut these out too so they're ready for when I need them when sewing. Now, when using fusible fleece, you should cut it out of the seam allowance. To calculate this, I snip into the pattern piece at points so that I can fold it back and not have to print it twice and have two different pattern pieces, which can sometimes be confusing. I fold it back for cutting the fusible fleece and then unfold it when cutting the actual fabric. Another option, if you're only making it once, is to cut off the seam allowance after you've cut the fabric out so it's ready for cutting the fusible fleece. So totally up to you which you choose. For cutting fusible fleece, I always draw around the pieces first and then cut. Due to the loft of the fleece, it can be easy to go off of the line that you need to cut. The good thing about fusible fleece is that it doesn't have a grain or direction, so you can cut your pieces any which way, which means you should always keep all your scraps because you never know when you're going to use them. Now, when fusing the fusible fleece to faux leather or vinyl, it's really tricky, and so I use this fabulous technique that I learned from Pink Pony Designs. I will pop a link to her original video in the description below. You want to place the glue side towards the interfacing or the back of the fabric. As we discussed earlier, you can't put an iron on the top of most faux leathers, so you need to fuse this from the back side. Side note, if you're using cotton fabric, then you can flip the piece over and should fuse it from the right side with the heat going through the cotton and heating up the glue dots rather than having to go through the loft of the fleece. You definitely want to use a Teflon sheet or baking sheet for this, and I have it underneath as well as on top to protect the iron and the board. Then you want to place another piece of non-woven interfacing on top of the fleece, slightly larger, and you're going to be sandwiching it. You want to press the back of this interfacing, fusing it to the back of the fleece. I find that it doesn't take too much heat to stick, and it's easier than fusing it to fabric. Now here comes the magic bit. Remember to fold the Teflon sheet over so you've got it either side of your work. Then you're going to use the end of the iron to push the interfacing down and into the seam allowance. As the fusible fleece is out of the seam allowance, it will create a step, sandwiching the fleece between the two non-woven interfacing layers. It's pretty clever and it works so well. Huge thanks to Pink Pony Designs for this. Notice that I'm moving the iron around more on this faux leather. I don't want the heat to concentrate too long in one area in case it damages it. Again, this is a case of testing your faux leather and seeing what works for you while also having it fuse well to the fusible fleece. And the final step is to cut off the excess interfacing. And of course we're doing this to all the pieces that need the fusible fleece attached. Okay, now that everything is interfaced, I like to organise pieces into lining or outer, and I read through all the instructions again to check that I didn't miss anything. So then it's on to the sewing. Check out the shark backpack video for that part. Thanks for watching. If you're interested in bag making tutorials and tips, please do subscribe and hit the like button to tell YouTube to show you more like this. I'll see you on the next video.